Hello again, fellow audiophiles. I am Wave Theory, and this was an originally unplanned part 2 of what has now become a series about signal chain building for the original HiFiMan Susvara. The original Susvara was a $6,000 US in MSRP when it was released, but now here in mid-2025, there have been several units that have sold on the used market for under $3,000 US. That opens up the door to a lot more people in acquiring this headphone. And so I'm coming at this video from the perspective of you are looking to build a signal chain for your recently acquired just under $3,000 HiFiMan Susvara that will not break the bank, but also starts to give you an idea of why this is such a special headphone. And it is a special headphone. Even though there are things like the RAL 1995 Imanis and HiFiMan's own Susvara unveiled out there anymore, the original Susvara continues to be one of the best headphones on the planet. And so getting it for under 50% of retail, if you can find one in good shape there, is an absolute steal. But it is also a notoriously difficult to drive headphone. So that's why part 1 of this now series was about amplifiers. So see my link in the description down below for that video. This video is going to be about DACs. What are my DAC recommendations for the original HiFiMan Susvara? Again, for a reasonable cost. And we will call reasonable cost here under roughly $3,000 US, because that's about what you paid for this headphone. And I think this is targeting a group that has some money, but will have to save up a lot and really be thoughtful and plan for the expenditure of such money and budget for it. So that's why I'm not going to talk much about DACs that go much beyond $3,000 US. We're going to stay under 3K, where we are in people who are serious about hi-fi, have some money but are not made of money. What are my recommendations in there? Stick around right after shameless self-promotion to find out.
Hello. I'm one of the reasons that Wave Theory can't spend all of his money on audio gear. He wants you to know that your support is vital for keeping the channel running. So if you enjoy Wave Theory's bussin' review riz and no-cap review style and want to encourage him to stay in the basement so I don't have to listen to his dad jokes as much, like the video and subscribe to the channel. You can also send him a donation on PayPal or sign up for the Patreon. Links are in the description. Now on to the review.
The first thing that I want the audience to do as we consider DACs for the original HiFiMan Susvara is for everyone to take a very deep breath. Okay? And I don't say that to be flip or dismissive. I say that because you don't need to stress about your DAC choice to near the level that you need to stress about your amplifier choice for the HiFiMan Susvara. This is in part why I originally didn't even really think to do a video about DACs for the Susvara. And that's just because the question is far less important. From the standpoint of the Susvara's difficulty of drive really means you need to put more thought into the amplifier for it. So again, that is what part 1 of this now series was all about. But I did come back and decide to do this video because a lot of people asked for it in the comments of that first video. What about DACs? And then another comment that came up in those videos, in multiple comments, was about, well, what about expensive amplifiers, the stuff over $3,000? What are my recommendations there? And the reality is I don't have many recommendations there. I have a limited experience with amps over $3,000 US. But then again, that missed the point of this video series now, in that because the price of used units of the Susvara have come down so much, in large part because the Imanis and the Susvara unveiled are out there anymore, the question is just the Overton window, if you will, has shifted downward in price. We need to have more conversations about gear under 3K that can pair well with the Susvara and all of that. So that's why we're here, and I'm not going to give a whole lot of commentary about DACs beyond 3K in there. Okay, now Again, the deep breath. Let's come back to that thing, like that the DAC is just not as much of a point of concern here. It's not something you shouldn't worry about. It is something you need to give some thought to, but the room for error here is much larger, much small. I don't know. The odds that you're going to screw up the DAC choice are far smaller than screwing up the amp choice. Because again, this thing is so difficult to drive. The amplifier, the first thing you need to be concerned about is, do you have an amplifier that can make it sing? Okay. Once you have that done, do that first for the Susvara. Specifically for the Susvara, do that first. Get an amp that will make it sing. Once you have done that, now we can start to talk about DACs. Now, I made a comment in that first video, and then also all of the videos that I have made about the Susvara, see links down in the description. I have commented that as crazy resolving as it is, and it still is in an elite tier of headphones on this planet in terms of its resolution capability, but for as resolving as it is remarkably forgiving. So you've got some wiggle room with the DAC in particular here. And again, I want to stress, once you have gotten an amplifier that can make it sing. Okay, if you make a mistake with your DAC, you're probably not going to notice it right away. And, honestly, it's very difficult for a DAC, in my experience, to make the Susvara sound bad. That stands in contrast with other top-of-the-line models out there, like the classic case being the Focal Utopia, where any part of the signal chain that the Utopia hears that it doesn't like, it will scream at you. The Susvara is far more gentle in revealing the flaws in your signal chain. It will show you where the errors are, or the flaws or the weaknesses of your signal chain are, but it does it in a polite and gentle manner. So again, everybody exhale a little bit. You're probably going to be okay. All right. Now, that said, I'm still going to hit some of the highlights on DACs for the Susvara from my point of view. Let me also explain a little bit more about how I think about signal chain building here, especially for the Susvara. And that's also going to kind of frame my recommendations in a little bit here too. And so some of that is also necessary for me to talk a little bit more about my personal preferences. So I like HiFiMan headphones in general, at least their open backs. Their closed backs, the Susvara, which is the most recent one, is pretty good, but before that, their closed backs were garbage. Okay. Their open backs, though, in my humble but honestly correct opinion, is that they are the standard setters at their various price points. It was said in a comment on my first video here, it's a HiFiMan world and we're all living in it. I think that is true, honestly. For open backs at the various price point, HiFiMan sets the standard. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to like them or that their tuning has to agree with you, that sort of thing. There are room for preferences here, but I'm talking about whole package, the combination of tuning, technical stuff like resolution, sound staging, imaging, separation, etc. They create consistently the most lifelike sound to my ears at the various price points of anyone else out there. So while HiFiMan is good at all of those things, the Susvara in particular, if there is one aspect of its performance where it could maybe use a little bit of help, it's in the dynamics and the impact of the sound. Now, most of that can be affected by amplifier, and you heard me say in my amplifier video for this headphone that I talked about the dynamics and the impact a lot. The amplifier goes a long way, but the DAC still has a say on the physicality and the impact of the sound of the Susvara. So I like a more dynamic, impactful, punchy kind of sound. It fits my preferred music genres of things like rock and metal a little bit more when there is that impact to the sound. That just helps me connect with the music a little bit more. Okay, so the recommendations that I'm going to make are kind of framed towards giving the Susvara even more of a little bit of dynamics and impact. Now, From a perceived frequency response standpoint, I do prefer like kind of a hint of warmth in my sound. I don't necessarily like full on all the way warm. Okay, but I do like just a little bit of a hint of that, like neutral, warm leaning, kind of in my sound signatures there. So most of the recommendations I'm going to give because of that are from some combination of either I chose that DAC to go with that amp because one of them is very neutral and the other one leans warm. So when you put them together, they kind of meet in the middle and create that neutral warm sound and balance each other out a little bit. That's how I do it. You are completely free to say that you like warm into warm to double down on the warm, or you like bright into bright to double down on that, or you like neutral into neutral, whatever. It's completely within your rights to do that, and you're not wrong for doing any of that. So from a perceived frequency response, I like to mix either a neutral DAC to a warm amp or a warm DAC into a neutral amp. Okay, and then I am a double dipper on the dynamics, right? I like both of them to sound punchy and impactful. So that's where a lot of my recommendations are going to come from. Now, what I have found here under $3,000 per piece is that very often it is difficult to find a warm DAC that gives you the resolution and the detail retrieval and the holography, the technical aspects of the sound that a neutral DAC will give you at this price point. I have found warm DACs under $3,000 typically are not as technically proficient as neutral DACs at this price point. Okay, that doesn't mean that you can't find a warm DAC that is also very technically proficient, or at least technically proficient enough for you. I'm just saying that for me, I miss some of the resolution and the detail that a lot of warm sounding DACs under $3,000 tend to leave off the table. Now, you get above $3,000, that changes because then everything gets good, right? But we're not talking about above $3,000. So most of the recommendations that I will have for the Susvara, then again, when we put all of this together, is going to be more of a neutral DAC into a warm amp, okay, and both of them being dynamic and impactful. Okay, so with all of that set up, and again, I want to stress, you do not have to do it that way. That is just how I do it. That is what I like, and that is what has worked for me for Susvara. All right, let's get into it. All right, starting at under $1,000 here, I have two candidates for sure that make my recommended list. And then I have a third that's probably going to end up there, but I'm still working on the review for it. And so it's not 100% certain yet, but looking likely. All right, so the two for certain candidates, we'll just kind of go in rough order of price here. They would be the Gishelli J2S, and then the Schiit Bifrost 2, specifically the /64 edition, which is the one that you can buy now if you go to Schiit's website and order a Bifrost 2. All right. The J2S from Gishelli gives you some unique options. It actually will be the lowest starting price of any of the DACs on this list at $269. But the J2S is highly customizable. All right, so it is a good entry point. I would suggest saving up if you need to and getting the variant with the AKM 4499 chip in it, just because that chip is a little bit cleaner, more resolving, just overall more proficient than the 4493 chip is, and that will pay dividends with something that is as resolving as the Susvara. I think you will appreciate that extra $100-something of investment to get the upgraded chip there. The nice thing about the J2S from there is you have an upgrade path within that same unit. You can upgrade the op amps. Okay, then you can get an external power supply for it and all of that. I liked the Burson V7 Vivids for op amps on the J2S. I think, again, because I like that active dynamic kind of sound, I thought the Bursons, the Vivids brought that out the best and are they're also just good with resolution, detail retrieval, holography, those sorts of things as well. And so they help with some of the dynamics and overall technicals of the Susvara. And then if you want to increase the dynamics in particular, again, you can get get an aftermarket linear power supply for the J2S. Now, I do need to drop the disclaimer here that if you get an external power supply and use it with the J2S, you are going to void the factory warranty with the J2S. So if you choose to buy an aftermarket LPS for it and you fry the unit, that's on you, okay? But that said, as long as you get a 12 volt LPS and it's a stable, safe 12 volts, you should be fine. I've been using a Swagman 12 volt LPS with the J2S that really increases the dynamic impact, but unfortunately, I think that company went under, and I haven't been able to contact them to see if buying that LPS is even an option anymore. But there are still other good options out there that I have tried, for like the iFi iPower X, the small green computer power supply, and all that sort of thing. Like you can find options for it out there that are really good. So if you get a fully tricked out J2S with an aftermarket power supply and all that, you can be pushing $1,000, but mostly still stay under it there. So it goes on this list. The shit Bifrost 2/64 has long been, it's right about $800 still, and it has long been, like, in my opinion, probably the best all-around sounding DAC under $1,000 US, particularly if you talk about stock configuration. A fully tricked out J2S comes very, very close, just a slightly different, maybe a little bit more neutral sound than the 2/64. The J2S also gives you more decoding options than the Bifrost 2 does, because the Bifrost 2 is still, at the time of this filming, limited to PCM files up to 192 kilohertz in sampling rate, no DSD or anything like that. However, the sound of the Bifrost 2/64 is pretty wonderful. It has gone more neutral than the original Bifrost 2 was, so that's why it's on my list here, because it fits into that category of mostly neutral DACs, and it is very punchy and slammy in the sub bass. There is a lot of energy down there that is dynamic and impactful. So I think it's a good candidate for the Susvara there. And then also for the price, the holography, the spatial presentation and all of that is very, very good. And it has a very natural timbre to my ears as well. So all of that I think plays well here in terms of giving the Susvara a good source to start with, right? Okay, the provisional recommendation that I have here under this price point is the new Live Micro DAC. That one is currently listed at $994 in MSRP, and I have not completed the review of that. I have had some limited listening with it, but it is here in-house, and I have gotten a few listens here and there. My sense of it is that it is one of the mold breakers here for DACs under $3,000, and that it leans warm, but also brings a lot of the technical proficiency with it as well, and a lot of refinement and all of that. So that is early and initial thoughts. It also seems to be on the dynamic end of things. Okay, but I have to say provisional recommendation here, just because I have not completed that review, but the early returns on it suggest to me that it will very much be a competitor for the title of best DAC under $1,000 US. And so just by nature of it being in that conversation means that yes, you can safely consider it to be something to be the front end piece for something like the HiFiMan Susvara if you are on something resembling a budget. Okay, so those are my recommendations there to look at under $1,000 US, the Gishelli Labs J2S, the shit Bifrost 2/64, and then provisionally the Live Micro DAC. All right, what about $1,000 to $2,000 US DACs? What do I like in that range? There are fewer options generally in this range. Like with amplifiers, I mentioned in that video, there was this weird kind of hole in the market where there just weren't a whole lot of amps between 1 and 2K that I thought were Susvara worthy, at least in terms of the power that the Susvara needs. There are a lot of excellent amplifiers in that price range, but they just don't necessarily have the power to drive this very demanding headphone. But again, with DACs, that's not so much a concern. So there are some options that open up here. I think the two of them that would be my personal favorites here in this price range for various reasons, okay, would be the Schiit Gungnir 2 and the Chord Cutest. Okay, I have reviewed both of those, so see the links down in the description for those reviews. The Gungnir 2 has a starting price of $1,600 US, and the Cutest currently is going for about $1,625 from most retailers that I can find on Google there. Okay. So looking at these each individually a little bit here, the Gungnir 2 is the one I reviewed more recently. It has a sound signature very similar to that of the Bifrost 2/64 that we just talked about, so that is a strength. But there are some features of the Gungnir 2 that are also attractive as well, like it can decode PCM files now up to 384 kilohertz, still no DSD. And we are awaiting an update to its Forkbeard control module that will put in things like digital volume control and parametric equalization and that sort of thing in there. So that's something to look forward to, but that is an excellent sounding DAC. It takes the sound of the Bifrost 2/64, adds some key and important features with more coming, but then also just it refines and elevates that sound even more so. Like it's a better version of the sound you get from the Bifrost 2/64. So again, mostly neutral, but punchy, good timbre, good spatial presentation, and all of that. So it is also a rock solid front end piece for something like the Susvara. All right, the Cord Cutest is going to be an even more neutral and incisive sound. It is a little bit more detail forward, and it really is like kind of one of the quintessential examples of take a DAC that is neutral, incisive, detail forward, dynamic, pair it with an amplifier that is warmer, smoother, and also dynamic, and you get a great marriage of sound there on the front end system for a HiFiMan Susvara. So the Cutest, it is an older model now, so like some of the USB implementation, like I think it's micro USB connectors and so forth, but it still sounds great. Like its sound is still very much competitive. It will give you DSD decoding, and it will do PCM files up to 768 kilohertz, and again, very neutral, very incisive, but still very active, lively, dynamic kind of sound with a great holography, spatial presentation, etc. It may be just a little bit tonally thin for some, and so this is one where I really strongly suggest matching it with a warmer, smoother, kind of thicker sounding kind of amplifier. Now, another thing about the Cutest is that it is single-ended only. No XLR outputs on that, only RCA. That can be an advantage because some amplifiers out there are single-ended only, and so this would be a good option if you have one of those amplifiers. But it's also generally not a problem to connect a single-ended DAC to a balanced amplifier, the single-ended inputs of a balanced amplifier. It's when you go the other way that problems can arrive. Okay, so between $1,000 and $2,000 US, my choices here for DACs for the Susvara are the Shit Gungnir 2 and the Cord Cutest. Now, there are a couple of other DACs in this price range that would be of interest to some and that I think are still worthy of mention. The Denafrips Aries series is also excellent. It's now a little bit over $1,000 US, I think. That is rock solid. As a DAC generally, that is getting into the territory though where from my preferences it does not make the best front end piece at this price range for the Susvara there, because it's again a warmer and smoother kind of sound, particularly the older versions of the Aries. The newer versions like the 12th anniversary edition for sure is also a little bit more neutral leaning in its sound there too. But I mean, like that's just one of those where I just think the Gungnir 2 in between 1 and 2K, the Gungnir 2 and the Cord Cutest are just a little bit better. The Aries is still very good. If you like a warmer, smoother kind of sound, and particularly if you think you might be interested in doing external upsampling like HQ Player or Pan Galactic Gargle Blaster, the Aries series is a good one to look at. Also in this price range is the Gustard R26. To me, the R26 is a bit overpriced in terms of what it can do sonically. To me, it's more on par with like the Bifrost 2/64, which is, roughly half its price. But there is a built-in streamer on the R26 and some other features that might make it attractive. It's not bad, right? Because the Bifrost 2/64 works well as a front-end piece for the Susvara, and the Gustard is like similar in technicals sonically to the Bifrost there. It's fine here. It's not as dynamic and punchy as the Bifrost though, so that's again a reason why for my preferences I don't put it on my recommended list, but your mileage may vary out there. It's still a solid product. If that's what you have, you're still good to go. You may just want to go with an amplifier that is particularly dynamic and impactful if you plan to drive Susvara. Okay. So then from $2,000 to $3,000 US, we get, more options for DACs that come in. And again, we also kind of have to fudge the price up at $3,000 a little bit here. We'll talk about that here in a moment. Okay. But for similar reasons that we did with amplifiers. Okay. Right now, my personal favorite DAC in this price range that I think would be a good front end piece for the Susvara would be the Live Harmony DAC. It's R2R, $2,700 US. Okay, and it may be just slightly warm, just a hint of warmth in there. But what I like about it and what I think makes it a good DAC for the Susvara is it still has an active, lively, and impactful kind of sound. Okay, so there's some energy to it. There's some low-end heft and rumble and that sort of thing too. Now, I have not heard for myself the shit Yggdrasil, but I know a lot of people like it, so that could be also an excellent option up here at around $2,400 US, I think. I just personally, that's one that I just have never had a chance to really hear, so I can't comment from my own experience as to whether or not it's good, but by reputation, it should be fine. Okay. Also up in this price range is, and this is where we have to fudge it a little bit, it's the Ferrum Vondla, which I think really comes into its own when you get its matching Hypsos power supply. The issue there is that the Vondla on its own is about $2,800 US. The Hypsos power supply adds at least another $1,200. So now you're talking like up around $4K, which might be more than fudging the $3K price. But because the Vondla itself can be under $3K, we'll just loosely kind of put it on this list. That one, very neutral, very incisive, lots of detail retrieval and holography and all that. Maybe a slightly smaller soundstage. But that one also, I think you're going to want to pair it with an amp that brings a lot of slam because you're not going to double dip on the dynamics there. But in terms of the other technicals, it's one of the best out there for the price at the moment to my ears. All right, so for desktop use, those are my recommendations. They're under roughly $3K, the Live Harmony DAC and the Ferrum Vondla. There are still a lot of other DACs up there that, that are good, like the Denafrips Pontus series is in this category as well. Same kind of deal. It's a little bit warmer sound and now all of that. So look for a more neutral amp there. And in this price range, most of the amps that I've heard that drive Susvara tend to be a little bit warmer in there. So it's not always the best match there, but it's still a very good series of DACs that if you like a little bit more warmer, smoother, more refined sound, then sure, yes, it can also be an excellent front end piece for the Susvara as well. Okay. I want to make special mention here of the Cord Hugo 2. Currently, it's about $2,175 from most retailers on a Google search that I just did. You don't want to drive the Susvara directly off of the Hugo 2. Its amp will not handle it, but it is an excellent DAC. It takes the sound of the Cord Cutest and puts it in a transportable form factor in there. And that's the big reason why I want to mention it, because in my amps video, I talked about how the Enlium HPA23RM is a transportable amp that can power the Susvara in its current drive mode and sound very good doing it. One of the issues with that Enlium amp is that it's single-ended only. It only has an RCA input on it, although it might have a 3.5 millimeter input on it as well, but that's still single-ended, unbalanced audio connection there. The Hugo 2 is transportable and it has single-ended output on it. And from trying the combination, I know the Hugo 2 and the Enlium HP23RM sound great together, and that they sound really good with the Susvara as well. So that would be like a really amazing transportable combination for the Susvara. If you want to be able to use the Susvara away from your main listening station, you want to be able to use it elsewhere. It's also good enough that you could use it at your main listening setup as your primary signal chain for the Susvara as well, with the added benefit that you can take it with you when you need to as well. All right. So again, are there other DACs out there that would be very good as a front-end piece for the Susvara under $3,000? Yes. These are the DACs that I have heard that have a sound profile that I think works well with amplifiers that I have mentioned, and then that make me enjoy the Susvara, or at least help me enjoy the Susvara quite a lot, actually. Your mileage may vary, and I want to come back to, you don't need to sweat the DAC choice for the Susvara nearly as much as you do the amp choice. The amp is the more important thing. The DAC becomes more about tailoring the sound to your preferences. I've tried to lay out some of my preferences here and how the DACs that I've named kind of fit into that, and hopefully that helps you. All right, please remember to like, subscribe, comment, check out my PayPal, my Patreon. Thanks for watching. Okay, I do enjoy these videos. Thanks for being out there and watching, and as always, enjoy the music.